Very good. I'd like to hear more. Yeah, this. Thank you very much for coming. Too loud. I'm going to try to remember everyone that I need to thank, get everything in the right order. I know I didn't do that a lot earlier. So let me start by thanking IRG and Agility and particularly Lily for managing the first 3 years of this discussion series, the Adaptation Community Meeting. Thank you. This is our first one, and James, thank you. This is the first one that Chemonics is managing for us so far. It seems very nice, a lovely room. Slides are on and working, so we're in good shape. Thank you very much. So today we're going to hear from Debra, who is with the Durban City Government and the Durban Adaptation Charter, and Susanne Torriente, who has connected with Susanne is with Fort Lauderdale. For the next few hours. And has connected with the City of Durban through the USAID program called CityLink. Before I turn it over to them, I want to thank again Chemonics and the Atlas program for hosting, Tony Sochi for sort of just doing everything he could to make sure that Debra got here. CityLink, the aid program that I mentioned, for making it happen. ACM, all right, which manages CityLink. Okay. And then eThekwini US and ACCO, the Association of Climate Change Officers, have communicated about this so that we have a better audience today. And then where's Mark? Mark Goldberg and Greenberg and the Urban Institute have also done a lot of work of trying to set up other meetings and communicate about this, promote this for us. So thanks to all of you for promoting this. I will stop talking now sorry, I won't quite yet. For the audience here in the room, Debra says it's fine if you ask a question while she's presenting. For those of you online, please email in.
There's a Q&A box where they can
type your questions into the Q&A box. But we probably won't take those until the end because it's distracting to me to have a question from someone that I just ask. So we'll do that at the end. First, we're going to have Debra talk with slides, and then Susie's going to talk without slides. So with that, I will turn it over to Debra.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. And I think John's done all the thanks. I won't repeat those. Just personal thanks to John, Tony, and Jessica for making this possible. I don't know how much hard work went into this. As John said, I'm here to talk about the Durban Adaptation Charter. So I am here wearing my local government hat as a good local government official, one who was involved in originating and implementing the charter. But I'm also going to talk to my role as a author on the fifth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And you could well be wondering this late in the afternoon what those two things have to do with one another. One, a very high-level global scientific assessment around climate change, and the other, a tool looking at facilitating local government action in the climate change space. And in fact, they are more closely related than you might want to imagine. Simply because many of the drivers and concepts which led to the development of the Durban Adaptation Charter are now made explicit in Chapter 8 of Working Group 2 of the IPCC's Working Group 2 report. So that chapter provides a very useful framework for looking at a tool like the Charter and assessing what kind of potential it has, what kind of usefulness it has in tackling the climate change challenge. So perhaps we should start off by asking ourselves what's new in the assessment report for those of us who are interested in urban areas. And with great relief, I can report that there's a much stronger urban focus in this assessment report than we've seen in any of the prior assessments. We've got a dedicated chapter on litigation, regeneration, and obviously one of adaptation. And again, we could ask ourselves, why have we landed there? Why is the ITCC coming into the urban space? Well, quite frankly, it's because they have no options. Climate change is no longer the only game in town. If we look at the kind of challenges we're facing in the 21st century, we've got a whole basket in front of us. We've got global environmental change. And of course, within that basket, climate change is absolutely critical, but we've also got biodiversity loss, we've got upsetting of biogeochemical cycles, we've got pollution, and so on. We've also got social upheaval. Probably the most current example of that is the crisis in Syria, leading to the refugee pressure in Europe. We've got economic collapse. I think we're all reading from 2008. Certainly those of us in the global south whose economies are tied very tightly to China are beginning to reel from slowdown in the Chinese economy. And all of those impacts are now beginning to concentrate themselves geographically. They're concentrating themselves in the world cities. So when we think about how we take our development path forward in the post-2015 period, it's been acknowledged at the very highest level that that agenda simply has to be relevant to urban dwellers. Because quite simply, the battle for sustainable development and interactive climate change is going to be won or lost in the world cities. Now again, we ask ourselves, why is that the case? And again, it's just sheer common sense. Cities really are the places that are now concentrating people and assets. In 2008, we became an urban species for the first time. And if we look at the current state, we've got 3.7 billion people living in the world's cities. The most worrying thing about that figure is that it will double by the middle of the century. And the bulk of that growth is going to be in cities of the developing world, the cities of the global south. Cities are also places where we concentrate assets, our economic activities. Our friends at McKinsey tell us that currently 600 are responsible for 60% of the global GDP. So we can begin to see a shift in the geopolitics of the world as nation states become less important and connected city-states become more important. And obviously, if we're going to concentrate that number of people, that amount of assets and activities in limited geographical spaces, they are going to be vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So all the wonderful things we read about in the IPCC, changes in temperature, drought, floods, are all going to manifest in the urban area through impacts on food and water security, on human health, loss and damage to urban infrastructure. So when we think about vulnerability and exposure to climate change, cities are really where the climate change rubber hits the road in the most significant way. And it was that realization that really drove the development of the Durban Adaptation Charter. We can see the scale of the challenge we face if we look at these two maps. This shows us the distribution of cities with over 750,000 people in 1950. You can see there's a nice scattering largely across the northern hemisphere. But if we project ourselves forward about 10 years from where we are today, you can see the situation has changed absolutely in time. We are living through the most rapid period of urbanization in our species history. You can see that in this planet of cities, it's really Africa and Asia that begin to rock the urban party in a very significant way. Another important link between the Fifth Assessment Report and the Durban Adaptation Charter is a very strong linkage we draw between the development agenda and the adaptation agenda. For those of you who know anything about climate change negotiations, you'll know we spend a lot of time focusing on the concept of additionality. So the unique climate change impact on systems and institutions. What we point out in our chapter is that divide between adaptation and development is in fact a very artificial one. It doesn't exist in the real world. And that's simply because underdevelopment puts cities at risk regardless of what kind of challenge they're facing. So the challenge could be a health challenge, it could be a challenge from a loss of biodiversity, it could be a climate change challenge. If you've got underdevelopment, you're going to be at risk. And if we look at the current state globally, we've got this huge problem with underdevelopment at a global scale. And that's because the bulk of our 3.7 billion people live in the low and middle income developing countries and cities of those particular countries. And remember, that's where the bulk of our urban growth is going to be as we go forward. We're also seeing our adaptation deficit increasing, not only because of the lack of conventional infrastructure that we've got in the cities, because of this growing loss of ecological infrastructure. So things that are critical to increasing our adaptive capacity, things like wetlands, mangroves, are being lost at the global scale. And sadly for us as a society, we've still got 1 billion people living in the world's informal settlements. So when we stare out at the future urban landscape, what we see before us is a massive challenge. But at the same time, this massive challenge offers us a unique global opportunity. And that really lies in the fact that this underdevelopment is going to result in a massive level of urban infrastructural spend as we go forward. And it's currently estimated we're going to up that infrastructural spend from about $10 trillion today to about $20 trillion in 2025. Now that's an enormous opportunity because the bulk of that spend is going to go into cities of the global south. So there's a real opportunity there to leapfrog, to put in place climate smart infrastructure that allows us to adapt at scale. And this is the one true global scale opportunity we have in the climate change space to really begin turning the corner on the climate change challenge. And just to give you a sense of the scale of that opportunity, I'm assuming that pretty much everyone in this room has the option of being alive still in 2030. Half of what we will see as urban built environments in 2030 simply does not exist today. It has not been built. So this is an enormous opportunity to do something different. And while the bulk of this opportunity lies in cities of the global south, we mustn't ignore the significant but extensive opportunity in the global north of replacing aging infrastructure in the climate smart way. So there are opportunities there that we should not overlook. Unfortunately, we live in a very unjust and unequal world. And because of that, cities will have different and unequal abilities to harness the opportunity of reaping the benefits of this adaptation dividend, simply because they don't have the resources to put risk-reducing infrastructure into the ground. And you can see how different the capabilities are when we look at this particular graph. You can see that our US governments are generally well placed to put in place risk-reducing infrastructure. But by the time you get to, here's the pointer, by the time we get to the cities on the continent I come from, there's very little resource availability in order to develop that kind of infrastructure. So you can see that we've got severe problems on continents like Africa. And so what we conclude in our chapter on urban adaptation is when we look out at the global level, we see a huge spectrum of urban adaptive capacity. On one side, cities with very low capacity, so very little risk-reducing infrastructure in the ground, very little investment capacity on behalf of local government, subject to frequent extreme events. On the other side, we've got the potential for what we refer to as transformative adaptation. So cities that have the ability to put risk-reducing infrastructure into the ground, that have reasonable investment capacity, that have got adaptation policies that are on the books and that are being implemented, that are chasing sustainable development and poverty reduction, and beginning to integrate those agendas with the mitigation agenda. We can't find any city that meets those characteristics currently, but there are inklings emerging in cities around the world. And again, that was one of the key driving forces behind the Durban Adaptation Charter, is how do we begin to drive cities from one end of the spectrum, so from the low capacity side, all the way through to the more adaptive capacity side. And in order to do that, we have to find a practical roadmap for allowing cities to make that kind of transition. Key to beginning that process, as I indicated, is really the need to begin integrating the big urban agendas. So we have poverty reduction and development, disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, climate change mitigation. We believe the integration of those big agendas really offers us the opportunity to fundamentally change our urban systems, to build our cities in a new way. And we're quite lucky because there's a natural overlap between three of those agendas. There's a natural overlap between activities that allow us to improve adaptive capacity, reduce risk, and to develop cities. So if we think about handling, for example, the runoff from an urban area, if we restore a wetland, that allows us to increase the adaptive capacity of our city by improving water quality. It allows us to reduce risk by taking the edge off floods, but it also allows us to tackle poverty because we can do that in a way that creates jobs. And the reason that there's such a strong overlap between those three agendas, particularly in the Global South, is because they deal with the problems in the here and now and in localities that are meaningful to people. There's less of an overlap with the climate change adaptation agenda. And the reason for that is that the benefits of those investments are only apparent when we move out of this period of committed climate change. And that's what the IPCC describes very clearly to us. We're currently in a period of lock. So we've already locked in the amount of climate change we're going to experience. The only tool you have in that period of climate commitment is climate change adaptation. When you move out of that period into the era of climate options, then your control of emissions, your reduction of emissions, your level of adaptation have the ability to impact on it. And this is the reason that we have a long delay in reaping our mitigation benefits. But we believe that if you put cities on a strong adaptation path, you can in fact put them also on a very ambitious mitigation path. And the reason for that is you can reinterpret the low carbon future that has been promoted in a variety of arenas, not as a standalone mitigation agenda, but as an important adaptation tool, as a mechanism of reducing our long-term risk and vulnerability. So in fact, you can bring in mitigation as an adaptation tool, and that makes it far more palatable from a developmental sense. And we've got a far greater opportunity then of moving many cities across that spectrum under those conditions. So how does that all relate to the Durban Adaptation Charter? Well, Durban is an unusual city in the sense that we have led with an adaptation focus from the beginning of our climate protection work. And as a result, when our city was chosen to host COP17 in 2011, we realized that we would have this really unique opportunity to raise the bar on the adaptation discussion at local government level. So we worked with a variety of stakeholders to convene a local government convention, which ran alongside the COP negotiations at the time. We had over 700 attendees and several days of very energetic debate. And the outcome of that was the Durban Adaptation Charter, now signed by over 1,000 signatories in 45 countries. The charter is really anchored around these 10 key principles. And if you look at them closely, you'll see that they echo those messages which are now explicit in Chapter 8 of the IPCC's report. It talks to the need to integrate the economic and development agendas with the adaptation agenda, the need to align mitigation and adaptation strategies, the need to think about vulnerable communities, to look at our ecosystems and how we use those constructively, to report out on the work that we're doing, to build partnerships, to integrate at the government level. So all of those in the Charter's principles. And so the mission of the Charter is really quite simple. It says that during this period of climate commitment, where adaptation is your most important intervention, action is absolutely vital. So the focus of the Charter is about encouraging action. It underscores the importance that that action should be driven to a large extent by local governments around the world. It also sets up a process of trying to decide which actions local governments around the world should be focusing on, because we do not have unlimited resources, so where do we get most bang for our buck? Importantly, it's also a lot about demonstrating self-leadership and self-organization on behalf of local government, which is important when we think about those references to local government in the text that might or might not go to Paris. It's Africa-based and Africa-led. We believe that's significant simply because of the vulnerability of our continent, and the fact that the bulk of our signatories come from the Global South, we also believe shows a strong identification of the Global South with the adaptation agenda. But we all know, and I'm sure many of you have been to these vast international jamborees, you sort of arrive there, you sign something, and you go home, and you do absolutely nothing about it. And so we were really determined that the Charter wouldn't become one of those non-executed commitments on behalf of local government. So after the COP, we spent a lot of time networking, locally, nationally, internationally. And during that process, we were very lucky in the sense that US EPA, through Tony Sochi, introduced us to USAID and via USAID to ICMA. And in discussions around the Charter, we agreed that it provided a potentially really useful experiment in the local government space in terms of encouraging local government action. And so they funded the hosting of an implementation guidance workshop in Durban. We invited signatories, we invited experts, and we cogitated for just just under a week on how you would take the charter forward. And where we really landed was with the recognition that you can't have a global recipe book for adaptation as you do for mitigation, because it's so context specific. And because of that, we felt that a regional model of implementation would be really important. And we felt that that regional model would be best linked to regional hubs. We also acknowledged that if we're going to take forward a project of this scale, we would need structured backup. There would be a need for a secretariat. So if we look at how the charter is currently run, our international champion is our mayor, Mayor James Morado, and he acts as a champion not only as the leader of our city, but also in his role as Vice President of ECI, where he holds the portfolio for the Durban Adaptation Charter. We also have put in place the opportunity for Durban to host the Secretariat, so the small, relatively inconsequential city stuck onto the tail end of Africa has put its money where its adaptation mouth is at and is funding the Secretariat for an international tool like the Charter. And the idea would be that we transition the Charter out of our offices into the ECI offices in due course so that they manage it as they do the Mexico City Pact. The Secretariat functions really pick up on the obligations of the principles. It's about encouraging partnerships between the cities that are signatories. It's about facilitating these context-specific discussions amongst our signatory cities, facilitating opportunities, training, and so on for member cities. Doing what I'm doing today, talking about the Charter and promoting it, raising funds, obviously encouraging reporting. It's no good having a bunch of local governments running around the world doing things that no one knows anything about. So in that regard, the Carbon Registry is important. It's the endorsed platform which comes from the Compact of Mayors. And obviously establishing partnerships with other programs and networks. There's no desire to replace anyone, but really to provide a new forum to talk in a more coordinated way about the importance of adaptation at the local government level. So those are the big ideas and big objectives. The fact of the matter is we've still got to make this real on the ground. So what are the fundamental building blocks of pulling the Durban Adaptation Charter rabbit out of that hat? Well, as I said, this idea of regionalized implementation is really linked to the concept of having regional hubs who are engaged in adaptation debates and ideally engaged in adaptation action. And so if you look at the Southern African region, Durban rather obviously is the regional hub for that region. But we've since learned, and in fact, Torriente will be speaking about that in more detail as a result of our peer-to-peer learnings, that we could in fact improve the operation of the regional hub city by partnering it with its local authorities in the forms of local compacts. So we've extended the regional city model to include local compacts. And in Durban, we've now formed a compact around our city with our 7 neighboring municipalities, referred to as the Central KwaZulu-Natal Climate Change Compact. We're also extending that model even further because we're saying that these adaptation collectives need support from appropriate research partnerships that are going to generate data and information that we can use to inform our decision making. So we're building those research networks around our adaptation collective in order to support it and to grow these local knowledge networks around our cities. And so this is the first important level of operation of the Charter, is at this local level, finding a regional hub city and building a compact around it. And the compact model is really important, particularly in places like Africa, because it allows us to draw in our smaller local authorities and secondary cities who are often left out of the climate change party. The question is this nationally scalable? And this is a question that we've posed ourselves. From the initiation of the compact in Durban, we've lured national government into our web, as it were, inviting them to attend meetings, to attend the trainings, to see the effectiveness of this local level discussion. That's been so successful that we've put in front of them a proposal to develop compacts around the other 8 metropolitan areas in South Africa. They've seen enough to believe that there's viability in this model and happy to promote that through a national network of cities that they're putting in place. We believe that this kind of model has the potential to show the real connection between local action and national processes. Because if we can get this up and running, we'll have 9 local adaptation plans that are detailed and structured, which can provide the architecture to inform the national adaptation plan that we're all obligated to produce under the UNFCCC. And obviously, we would encourage regular reporting reporting out of this network into platforms like the Carbon Registry. As I've indicated, the regional hub city with its local compact is seen as anchoring the regional debate. And so really that hub provides the focal point for local authorities and cities in that region to have those context-specific discussions. And in thinking about how we operationalize that, we really landed on the regional workshop model. And so our first regional workshop was held in Tanzania at the end of last year because Dar es Salaam is our East Africa hub. And that drew together over 228 mayors and representatives throughout Tanzania. During the course of that workshop, there was general climate change training to build capacity to understand the challenge. We also offered, after the workshop, specific training focused on sea level rise, which is a particular issue along the African coast, using engineers from our city to train the Tanzanian engineers. And again, that process was funded by USA, ACM. The resolution coming out of that process was that all of the local governments who participated would form climate change committees and they would go away and form their necessary compacts. So we've been able to scale that out at the national level in Tanzania, and we've begun the reporting on the kind of the city's registry. The next of the regional meetings will happen in Southern Africa, and because Durban is a hub for Southern Africa, that meeting will be in Durban. It will happen in October of this year. Again, a very strong focus on capacity building around understanding climate change. And again, good links made available to us by US EPA, by Tony's office, have led us to form a partnership with us, with the Climate Reality Project, which is very useful. Susie will be coming out to talk about training our participating cities around operationalizing the compact model. And again, we'll be using this as an avenue to promote the idea of the metropolitan spread of the compact in South Africa. And what we found is all of this work tends to create a momentum on the ground. So in doing the kind of round robin we do, talking about this work internationally, the USA team in Mozambique got to hear of this work. They got very excited, and as a result of that, Kemba and Quelimani came to visit us. They signed the charter, and we'll be coming to the regional workshop to participate in the training and the developments around training them to develop compacts of their own. So we can see that this whole process of engaging with adaptation at the local level is really leading to an expanding network on the African continent on cities that are interested in adaptation as links to development and broadening their horizons through a process of network and peer-to-peer learning. And that all builds out into the international architecture of the charter as it stands at this point. And that's the third level of operation of the charters, where our regional hubs and local compacts interact with one another. And just to give you a sense of how powerful those interactions can be, after our implementation guidance workshop in 2013, talking to the USAID ICMA team, they were very interested to see what implementing the charter might involve. And so they funded a series of exchange visits between Durban and Fort Lauderdale and Broward County. And on the visit of the Durban team to Fort Lauderdale and Broward County, we were introduced via Torriente and Jennifer Morado to the background and history to the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact. We felt that was an incredibly powerful model of local organization. We kind of scratched our heads and thought, gee, implementing this at home is going to be pretty difficult, but it's an idea that we really think has got legs. So we ran home, we rallied the resources, we laid the groundwork to create the right kind of political environment for the acceptance of such a model, and pulled together the central KwaZulu-Natal Climate Change Compact around that. That's been so successful, but we've been able to promote that model in the Tanzania environment. So here you can see a South-South-North partnership, which is very capable of rapidly taking a good idea, translating it into a new geography, and spreading it. And I think that's a very powerful message. We've also started to form links to existing networks. So those of you in the climate change space will know about the Rockefeller-funded ACM network in Asia, which has been running, I think, just under 10 years now, so we're linking into that network. And also liaising with Bogota, who's leading a group of cities in Latin America on a resilience roadmap. There's a lot of commonality there. So that's the kind of international architecture that's been built around with that. And so in conclusion, I think both the IPCC messaging and the kind of experiences of the Durban Adaptation Charter point to a great deal of untapped potential that is currently existing at the global level. The IPCC gives us a very clear roadmap in the fifth assessment report about the need to really engage adaptation during this period of climate commitment. Something like the Durban Adaptation Charter talks to us very much about what can be achieved with very few resources, simply by putting the right people in the right places at the right time, talking about the right things. And so that raises questions in our minds about the real potential that might exist if cities got the right kind of political and financial support to take this work to scale. How many more cities could we drive from one end of our adaptive spectrum to the other? We think a great deal. We believe that this experience and these messages are important to hold in the back of our mind as we all go to Paris and look towards this global agreement. The importance of adaptation is part of that agreement, the importance of acknowledging local government as a key implementing agent. So that's it for me. And as I say, I will happily answer questions when we get to that part of the session.
Good afternoon, everyone. Always a pleasure and an honor to share space with Debra and the work that she's doing. It's amazing. Hi, Jen. Let me just explain a little bit of why I said I was going to be in Fort Lauderdale for just a few more hours. I'm joining the city of Miami Beach, so within the region of South Florida. I'm joining them on Monday as a dual role, actually, as an assistant city manager and also chief resiliency officer. And it's not the grant-funded resiliency officer, it's the position that was actually created by the city itself because it's really focusing a lot of its efforts lately on this very important subject. So I'm starting that new endeavor on Monday. But the good thing is that I'm still in the region and I'm still going to have the same contacts and working in this very important space. So what I wanted to do today is not have slides and just talk a little bit and hopefully open it up for some good dialogue this afternoon. And I do want to tell you the story of how Durban and Fort Lauderdale met and how the compact influenced the work that Debra just described. Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact came about in the spring and summer of 2009. And it started as a conversation among Monroe County, which is the Keys, Miami-Dade County, Broward County, and Palm Beach. And I remember being right up here, actually, you see, walking through the halls of Congress with different delegations from the four counties. At the time, I was with Miami-Dade County as Director of Sustainability. And we were going to each of the different offices, and we each had our different maps and our different scenarios. And we were talking, and we were trying to make sure that the feds understood the gravity of the situation and the vulnerability of South Florida. The problem was that we each had different maps and different facts, and we didn't look very coordinated. So every time we walked out of an office, we were in the hallway thinking, we need to do something. We need to get a little more organized because we sound a little silly, not having one story. So we came back, we got our plans together, and we had our first leadership summit in the fall of 2009. And for the first time, we brought together many elected officials of the region, but for the sole purpose of only talking about climate change adaptation and mitigation and how we could rally together and work together. As a result of that meeting, the Climate Compact was born. And by the January of 2010, all four counties of Southeast Florida signed on to the compact. And if anybody understands South Florida politics, it's very rare to get agreement on the four county commissions, unanimous agreement to work on this subject. It was a very simple document that has led us through the last 5-6 years. It basically said, we're going to work together and we're going to create unified sea level rise projections. We're going to get a regional greenhouse gas emissions baseline. We're going to agree to come back every year and have an annual summit to understand what we're doing and celebrate our success and continue plans moving forward. We agreed to have joint policy statements every year, so we would speak to the state, to Tallahassee, and to Washington with one voice on this subject. And we said we would create a regional climate action plan. And one of the most important things about the compact I should mention is that the compact is actually a bipartisan effort. It is not a new form of government. really is this one document that guides the work, but we're not replacing creating a new form of government. We're not taking power away from anybody. The counties go back and work through their own governing bodies and to make this work possible. So I think that's very important because it wasn't threatening, if you will. It really is probably the first example in the States of this type of regional collaboration in terms of climate. And the compact resolution, I think, is probably one of the more clever documents that I've seen in local government because it's broad enough to get us to work together, but as staff, it gave us enough air cover to also work in this space and really chart our course where we hadn't been before. So like I said, my role at the time was Sustainability Director in Miami-Dade County. I landed a seat on the staff steering committee of the compact. The compact basically right now has, the 4 counties have 2 seats on the staff steering committee. The cities now have a seat at the staff steering committee, and that's because I actually left Miami-Dade County in 2011 and joined the city of Fort Lauderdale up in Broward. And so at that time, I advocated and was successful in now having municipalities having a seat at the table. So there are 4 cities that are part of the compact right now. The city of Miami Beach from Miami-Dade, Broward from Fort Lauderdale, Key West, and Boynton Beach from the West Palm Beach. So I wanted to share that kind of background about the compact because this is where it gets interesting. The city's been a member of ICMA for many, many years, and from time to time, we get our emails that say, do you want to participate in this program or that program? Well, one day I'm sitting at my desk and I get an email probably from Jessica, and it said, do you want to participate in the city exchange on climate adaptation? And I thought, well, this is very curious. I run to my boss and I say, can I apply for this opportunity? He's like, okay. And so I do my write-up and I talk a little bit about what we're doing in Fort Lauderdale, but I also talk about this work in the region, which is what I just described, and I think very important. And so from what I understand, Jessica sent Debra application after application. And it was a bit of a beauty contest, I think, is our running joke. She comes across the application from Fort Lauderdale and is intrigued by this notion of regional cooperation. And, well, the next thing I know, Jennifer Morado and I from Broward County are on a 13-hour flight to Durban. We get to visit Debra and her staff for about a week. The first day, you locked us up in a room for about 8 hours, did bring us lunch, thank you, and interrogated us about this compact and the intricacies of the compact and the politics of the compact. And so I was there talking about, at my level, I'm not a scientist or an engineer, I'm a simple MPA in an English major, but I've navigated pretty interesting politics in Miami-Dade County in South Florida. Dr. Jennifer Morado, of course, is the brains, one of the brains in the compact, and she talked a lot about the details and the science and all that. But then we spent the rest of the week with the staff and, again, more exchange. By the end of the week, when we sat back with Debra, and Jessica was with me, you were intrigued but not convinced. And we thought, wow, I really hope this gets somewhere, but, seems like it's going to be a lot harder to do this in Durban. Well, the next time I saw Debra, you came to Fort Lauderdale twice for the exchange, and then you came to our summit the year that it was in Fort Lauderdale again. You gave the keynote address at the compact, and we learned that our work in South Florida is a model for the work happening now in South Africa. What an amazing and humbling feeling and opportunity for me and for all of us in South Florida to be part of this incredible international work. It's just so incredibly rewarding. And I'm pleased to share that Fort Lauderdale and Broward were the first American cities and counties to sign on to the Durban Adaptation Charter. It was kind of a no-brainer because you read all the issues, its mission and its principles. It's exactly what we're doing in local government in South Florida. It's what the cities are doing, it's what the counties are doing. And by the way, I'm going to get my to sign on as well as soon as I get there. So that's kind of the story of how it came together. We've had the opportunity then to continue our work. One of the things I like to say about the South Florida Compact, that it was created during some pretty rough times in local government. There were budget cuts and we were getting kind of scaled back all along. And by creating the compact, all of a sudden I felt that I had staff all over the region, that I didn't have to just go down the hallway to talk to staff. I could pick up the phone and call my friends in Key West or in Palm Beach County or any other city in the region. The region actually represents 4 counties, 100 cities, and about 5.8 million people. And that staff on this subject matter, we've become very tight and very united. So we've expanded our network of professionals. And now we continue to expand it with the network of professionals that Debra just described earlier there. I think I just want to mention one more thing and maybe open it up for some questions and answers. But the last time we came together, we were in the Resilient Cities meeting in Bonn. Tony was there with us as well, ICMA, and your staff. And we had the opportunity to continue talking about not only the regional cooperation, but I've had an interesting experience of working on that regional level from the county. And then for the last 4 years, I've been wearing the city hat, the municipality hat. And that's really where we say the rubber hits the road. When issues are happening, it's those cities that are the front lines. And so for the last 4 years, I've taken that regional climate action plan and said, how am I going to make this happen in my city of Fort Lauderdale? And so I have, over the last 4 years, operationalized the compact, if you will, within the city by building capacity, by creating the structure, by training the staff, by starting to look at the decision-making process and informing it with the data that we now have. So it's that type of information that I shared a little bit with Sean and the others in Bonn earlier this year, and that's why I was invited to go back to Durban in October to hold a one-day workshop and really go into the details and of what I've done over the last 4 years in terms of getting that operationalized in the city of Fort Lauderdale. So now I've left that foundation in Fort Lauderdale. I'm going to the city of Miami Beach, which has its own very similar vulnerabilities and issues in terms of flooding. They've taken a very aggressive infrastructure approach. Their mayor, their commission, their residents are investing, to your point, Debra, the money is there. It's a little different than Fort Lauderdale, which has been a little more reserved with the money. So I'm interested in kind of comparing the two cities. I want to understand what the city has done over the last few years, find out where the gaps are, and then continue to fill those gaps. So that's what I'll be doing starting Monday. I know that our relationship will continue because through our friends at EPA and through CityLinks, it's city-to-city exchange that is really making the difference. In the absence of anything from the state or anything really from the federal government, it's cities coming together, and it's that regional cooperation and tackling these issues little by little. That's how we're going to be successful. So I'd like to open it up for questions now, if you'd like to.
You mean to point at people from that area? How do you guys want to vote? So, thank you both. That was great. Thanks again. I don't want to forget. Thanks to CityLinks and Jessica for doing the hard work of getting Debra here. Thanks to Susie for doing the hard work of getting Michelle here. And we can open up to questions. Okay.
Use the mic. First, thanks to both of you for really interesting presentations. My name is Chris Breen. I'm the Chief of Party for the Atlas Project, which is, for those who don't know, the climate change adaptation program that USAID's running out of Washington State. Just one question that comes up in my mind from both of your presentations, and that is, in the case of the local adaptation plans in South Africa, in the case of the compact, and to pick up on a phrase that you both use, is where the rubber hits the road. How do these things get translated, the initiatives and the I assume vulnerability analysis and things that goes into these plans, get into the actual sort of municipal comprehensive planning process, you know, and into the decision-making and ultimately into the, you know, the decisions on infrastructure or you know, rebuilding of ecosystems, awareness building and other things. I wonder if one or both of you could just talk a little bit about that.
What we've done in terms of the process of mainstreaming, just because of the nature of our institutions, we rely a lot on champions. And so if you look at the process of bringing climate change as an issue into the city, I did that process. We very rapidly encountered a realization that no matter how many times I spoke to my engineers about climate change, they simply weren't going to listen. So you get a lot more strategic. So what we've done is we brought a cadre of climate change champions. I found people for whom climate change is a natural next step in the discourse in their field. So engineers working with water or in the coastal zone or handling stormwater. It's a reasonably natural extension for them. They're more easily drawn into the climate change debate than, for example, my waste engineers. Trained them up, and part of the exchange visit in visiting Florida was to bring some of those teams to build their awareness and understanding, and then you see those various sectors with those champions who then become self-motivated and drive that forward. So, you know, someone like myself will bring the idea, I'll write it into the strategic plan, and then you build the army of people behind you who understand what that means and will go out and implement it. The first step, obviously, is to look for that natural alignment of issues with the kind of things that they're working on, because that's the one thing we found. We still work in an environment where climate change is often not accepted as real, it's seen as some kind of conspiracy to halt development. So one has to literally infiltrate the institution with the right kind of people.
We've done very similar things in Fort Lauderdale, and I think that's probably we get along so well because we know how to infiltrate these large organizations. In terms of the Regional Climate Action Plan in South Florida, it's a broad framework, if you will. It's not necessarily the type of sustainability plan or climate action plan that you see that has details, because the region is still diverse with 100 cities. So that kind of regional framework, each city can go about the process of how to align their individual plans. And for example, when I got to the city of Fort Lauderdale, I was working on the regional climate action plan, but then I was also staffing the community vision plan. So I was able to get those two plans and work to align them so that when the climate action plan was adopted in 2012, the city's the vision plan was adopted in 2013, and the strategic plan in 2014. There were definite linkages so that we could line up to what was resilient in the resilience efforts of the entire region. And one example is that we amended our comp plan to designate adaptation action areas. That's actually a recommendation in the Regional Climate Action Plan. It was adaptation action areas are a creation of the compact. It's something we came up with. And Fort Lauderdale was the first city in the region to go through the process of amending the comp plan, having that voluntary planning language. And now with this year's capital plan, we've actually identified adaptation areas and projects in the city of Fort Lauderdale. And the purpose of having that designation is that we identify areas that are vulnerable, and we identify public infrastructure dollar investments to those areas. So that's one example of what we've done.
Dan Krieger with the Association of Climate Change Officers. So I just want to ping you because there's a second component of what you're doing down now in the capital side that I think also addresses this question that I think that we need to hear about. Can you talk to them about what you've been doing to train your workforce, rewrite job descriptions?
One of the things I realized when I got to Fort Lauderdale 4 years ago is that there were about 3 people that I could talk to about this subject. And I also realized that in order to make things happen, we needed that whole kind of army of champions. So I started talking to the engineers and the planners, the emergency managers, and trying to find training opportunities for them. And through the work of the compact and the funding that came through the Kresge Foundation to the compact, we've had regional workshops. So I've taken advantage of the regional workshop, and I've sent staff, planning staff, engineering staff, folks that haven't really been exposed to this. Also, through NOAA, we've been able to bring training workshops, climate adaptation, kind of 101 training. And my idea there was that we need to approach local government very different than we have been in years past. We can't continue to plan and engineer the way we did back in 1990 when I started working for government. So what we've done is we've taken that Regional Climate Action Plan, the sea level rise projections, that data that we now have, I've really tried to make sure that the staff understands it, they're trained, and they're doing their jobs differently. And what Dan mentioned about the job descriptions, I've also now, if I'm going out and looking for an engineer, how do I rewrite that job description to attract the right type of engineer that understands the issues in South Florida? How do I look at a procurement and a solicitation that is going out and we're going to hire a consultant to work in Fort Lauderdale? I want to make sure that consultant is going to do work in Fort Lauderdale, understands our issues. And so by tweaking little processes, I don't have to do a full-scale, rehaul of personnel rules or procurement rules, because that would take years. But little tweaks here and there have really helped us start to make differences in the way we are approaching this work. And again, it's opening up staff's eyes, giving them the tools that they need. I kind of said in one meeting the other day that training is like crack. Once you get a little bit of it, you want more. And that's what's been happening to my staff. I know it's a terrible thing to say, but I'm from Florida. Right? So, but what I've seen is that the staff, the more and more that they're exposed, the more and more they want. And the last thing we just did in Fort Lauderdale is that we did a Climate 101 training for every single employee. And from the frontline service worker to the city manager, went to a 3-hour class dedicated to the climate issues internationally and what we're doing in the city. And by last count, 2,300 city employees received that training.
I'll go here and then back to John and then over to you.
Hi, I'm Kara Reed with RTI International. I first wanted to say, Debra, when you were talking about mainstreaming, it was bringing back some flashbacks to when I was interviewing your engineers back in 2008, but I'm glad some of them came around eventually. But I'm curious to know, Susie, when you were kind of envisioning the process for the compact and when the outcomes you thought you would or that you were seeking, and similarly for Debra, when you were thinking of how to tailor an approach for South Africa, I presume there were some things that you expected or hoped to kind of get out of the processes. But I'm actually curious to know if there were like 1 or 2 things that were really unexpected that you kind of didn't plan for, or that came out that were maybe related to or unrelated to adaptation, but that ultimately were kind of beneficial for either of your communities.
Yeah, I think from the unexpected side, perhaps the corollary to the questions we've been asked about how do you make this live in the local environment needs to be partnered with the question around what are the limitations, because you can be very busy little bees at the local government level. You can build lots of armies of willing staffers, and you can train them. The problem is you will very rapidly hit a glass ceiling. And that glass ceiling is created by national limitations in terms of policy, in terms of devolution of power, in terms of the fact that there is not a strong international debate yet around adaptation and local government. And without that mandate, you are quite limited ultimately, if your vision is big. And that's half the reason for the Durban Adaptation Charter is a kind of pincer attack on the problem. So rally your local forces, but begin changing the international dialogue to drive a change in the national dialogue, because that's often the most recalcitrant level is national. And that's really where the unexpected finding of the local compact came in the interactions with Fort Lauderdale and Broward. We saw the importance and power of a local adaptation collective working together. What we didn't realize is just as we've used the charter to drive pressure on our own national government by creating international momentum around this discussion, we were able to drive pressure from local action up into the national space to begin to create the discourse. So not only has it proved to be a useful functional tool, sharing skills, resources, and opportunities, but it's become a very important political tool in leveraging a new national debate. And I think that's important. We mustn't ever lose sight of the need to remove the glass ceilings that exist above all of this wonderful busy bee work at the local government level that actually can curtail it quite severely.
Just two quick thoughts. We were kind of making it up as we went along. So while we had some goals, we really didn't know what to expect. And the staff steering committee that I mentioned earlier, we were just very deliberate and careful in taking baby steps, if you will. We didn't jump into anything too quickly. What I've been surprised at is that now the compact is 5 years old. And while it was bipartisan in the beginning, you know, there was still the whole issue of some of our elected officials were careful about what they wanted to say, and if they were Republicans, they were, you know, a little hesitant. Now, 5 years later, the local elected officials in South Florida, it really has become a nonpartisan issue. It really is, we're South Florida, these are our issues, these are our vulnerabilities. I'm surprised to have seen that in 5 years, that it's really not partisan anymore.
Before I go to John, I just have a follow-up. I grew up in Florida and I still watch what's going on down there. You've got 100 cities in your South Florida Charter compact. How about the rest of the state? Are other communities looking at what you're doing and taking a different view on climate change?
As you go further up the state, it's not the, right, it's not that, it's not the same. There was a 7-county effort, through the HUD, Sustainable Initiatives Grant, and that was, economic development plan for the 7 counties, starting from Morado going all the way up. There was a climate element in that plan, and we lost the top county, because they didn't want to be part of that. So it's not the same throughout Florida, but I know that Jacksonville right now and the Tampa area are looking at some form of regional collaboration, whether they call it a compact or something else. They're starting to have those conversations.
No, come over here.
Thanks. This is very interesting for me. I've worked in climate change for over 15 years on the U.S. delegation. COP6 goes way back. But it's always been rural, never urban. And since then, our company, of course, has had people in Durban, some at present for a forestry conference, but also at COP17. And their impression was the glass ceiling in Durban was nevertheless somewhat higher than it is in Florida. I've just come back from a pre-COP21 conference in Paris, and kind of culture shock to hear the senator from Florida, presumably has quite a lot of votes in your area, make some truly disgraceful remarks about, you know, that we have a choice on this, and yet, of course, there's more salt water going into toilets in South Florida than Durban, is my guess at the moment, and yet the glass ceiling would be lower. And, so, you know, we hit a political process here where, the IPCC data comes back more and more pessimistic each time. And all these exciting things are happening at the municipal level in South Florida. And then we get a senator elected by the people like that, who can say what he said last night. And is this something that is better or not for this network and this charter to take on? I mean, it's one thing for any U.S. senator to say that, but one from Florida, where is, I guess, our most vulnerable state. And maybe it's best to navigate around the denial sphere, but we've been doing that a long time in this country.
The work in South Florida, it's local. We're not getting anything from the state. We had a small planning grant for the Adaptation Action Area project that I just mentioned. We did a case study in Fort Lauderdale, prominently in that case study explaining what we did and how we implemented our comp plan and the outreach and the education. I think that's still sitting on somebody's desk in Tallahassee because it hasn't been approved because it probably just climbed it too many times. The compact continues to have the legislative priorities to Tallahassee and Washington every year. That's, you know, there's politics are politics, but it's not stopping the work that we're doing in the region.
I'm Amar Malik with the Urban Institute here in Washington. I really enjoyed your presentation and this perspective of this inspiration that comes from one city to another. But as a researcher, the more I think about adaptation, and the more I want to know how I can measure it. How do I know if Durban is more, what's the size of the gap that you have in Durban versus another city? And when I look at the research that's coming out, there are a number of, frameworks and indices and this and that coming out all over the place. Everybody has their own kind of touch to it. On the one hand, you have people like Susanne who work on community resilience. On the other, you have engineers who think of resilience as the ability to bounce back, almost as an elasticity. And I do understand that this is a field that conceptually is in a bit of a flux because you have adaptation, mitigation, resilience, and other things. But as a charter, what's your take on it? How do you look at this? How do you want to move forward on it? And just related to that question is also this issue of unit of analysis that I think I used to get disturbed sometimes when you look at the rankings where cities, metropolitan areas often get mixed up. So does your approach of having this regional perspective, does this help? Does it make one region more comparable to another in another part of the world?
I think you've gone to the heart of perhaps the most bedeviling challenge that we face in the adaptation space, which is the measurement of the scale of the problem and then the success or other of tackling that problem. What we felt, and this is just because we have the pressures already materializing at local government level, the important thing was to begin the momentum of action. So to reach some kind of agreement that there was a problem, that there were mechanisms to tackle that problem, to look at the kind of structures that might be appropriate to pull together people to create a collective space for discussing that problem and how to move forward. We've begun to create that skeleton, as you've seen. Now, as part of that, you'll see one of the principles of the Charter is this concern around measurement and assessing progress. We've begun to form stronger linkages. So we're part of a group that's currently being led by the C40, looking at those kind of indices. If adaptation is such a context-specific issue, can you actually land on generic measurements? And in fact, we had a very long Skype call last week. The general consensus is it's going to be extremely difficult. We may be able to describe typologies of problems, related typologies of solutions and potential outcomes, it's going to be very hard to set equivalent standards as you have in mitigation. Drop by 80% by 2050. That's simply not going to be the same. So I think that's a work in progress. It's one of the reasons that we've taken the concept of the regional hub and the local compact out into research partnerships. Because our strong feeling is that there is no generic answer, that in fact those metrics will have to be set up for the most part in the local environment, and that comparison is going to be very difficult. So you may be able to structure the conversation across the common typologies, but I think it's going to be very difficult. And so, for example, if I know two cities, or the two cities I know well in South Africa, Cape Town and Durban, both South African coastal, our approaches are entirely different. One's on Venus, one's on Mars. And it's very hard to compare them outside the generic principles. So I think that's a work in progress, but I don't think you can have that discussion unless you have people who are literally in the trenches doing the work and reporting back on what they're finding in order to be able to triangulate around some of these very wicked problems, no question.
I agree. It's very difficult to measure. We too have the conversations. We don't have actual measurements in our regional plans, like the way you do it in other plans. I would just offer that it's resiliency to us, and what I like to say, it's not about bouncing back, it's about bouncing forward. And so it's not going to be what you're used to, it's going to be a new normal. And we're looking at incremental changes and essentially buying time when it comes to certain things like flooding, as one example. So it's still an area that we need to work on a little more to have measurements that folks can relate to.
I want to remind people to please, if you like, sign up. We'd like to know who's here. If you'd like to receive emails about the subsequent events, put your email down. If you don't want to know about them, then go put your email. We won't be able to find you. And if my drink looks refreshing, there are more of them next to them. Let's see. I had Danielle, and then Ian, and then Tony, and then Rose, and then Mark. This side's quiet. If anybody over here has a question,
Hi, Danielle Miley with USAID. Thank you both for your presentation. Debra, this question is for you. I was wondering if you can speak a little bit more about how you selected the hubs, the leading adaptation cities. Were they already ahead of the curve in terms of their adaptation planning? And what were some of the common denominators among them in selecting them?
Again, very organic. And a lot of this work, and I'm sure Susie will agree, is quite opportunistic, because the desire is to create a momentum of action. So obviously Durban self-selected itself. That's a wonderful process. The way we've selected the other hubs has, in fact, in many ways mimicked the way we chose the local champions. Do we know you? Do we have a relationship with you? Do you have some kind of pedigree in the field? And in fact, the choice of the other hubs, for example, we look at Dar es Salaam, we knew we had someone we could talk to there. We knew his track record, we knew he was passionate, and we knew that he could negotiate the complex politics of a highly centralized system. And so he's opened doors we simply would never been able to through any other mechanism. As Susie said, it was a beauty contest that led us to Broward County and Fort Lauderdale. This idea of regional organization we hadn't come across in all of our discussions with other parties. So it was that unique idea, and generally we find unique idea, we find unique personalities behind them. And lo and behold, that's exactly what we did. So we're going where we find the energy, the same as Bogota. If we look at Latin America, they're standing apart. They've literally picked up their resilience roadmap process and are driving that hell for leather on the basis of some very strong champions. ACM is a network that's built out already on the back of Rockefeller funding, so that's something that was established. So we're really looking for opportunity because, again, bear in mind the peculiar nature of a city like Durban. We're the poorest of major metropolitan areas in South Africa. Our resources are incredibly limited, so to sustain this kind of network is an absolutely enormous endeavor for us. So it's literally a matter of opportunity, but what we're trying to present is some evidence-based learning. We're trying to show that things are possible, even in the most unusual and difficult circumstances. But that does create a process of selection, that you go where you know that you've got a chance of some reasonable success.
I have to remember what I said. Ian Susanne, Still Point Solutions. I'm especially interested in the question of motivation. And Debra, you spoke about how motivated the people in your regional group and networks are as the hub and the network, and how that allows your work to be very effective with relatively low level of resources. And it kind of makes sense that motivation is going to be best in areas where the consequences of climate change are most tangible and threatening. And so naturally, low-lying coastal areas would be very well motivated, perhaps best motivated outside of California, the United States. My question is, for you, Debra, what do you find fuels to motivate outside of the coastal areas, the region that you're working in? And for you, Susie, are you aware of, or do you run into other really highly motivated pockets of local level, of well-motivated local level climate change adaptation work organized at the local level?
Thanks for that question, and it points to what I think is assumed to be a general law of adaptation, that risk is the key motivator in driving adaptation action. It's not. It might be the case in the global north. It's simply not in the global south, because our risk acceptance is so high. And so those things don't trouble us. You can throw a million extremes against us. We just keep walking through it. The stronger motivator for us is we never play the risk card, because it has no traction. What we do play is integrated development card, because that's the key objective. We create opportunities to demonstrate how walking this path meets development objectives in new and unexpected ways. And the reason that our local compact has worked is we've used the demonstration capability of Durban. So we are a very experimental city. We've tried things. We are not scared to fail. And we've been able to demonstrate that it's a new way of delivering economic development by going a route that prioritizes climate change adaptation and biodiversity. And that's the lure, because if I went out and said sea level rise, I'd get a yawn. You know, if I said flooding, someone would fall asleep in the back row. No one notices these things anymore. But it's the development opportunities associated with this that are really the lure in our environment. That's the messaging around ours. Our messaging is entirely different. We take the positive message as the attraction in, rather than the risk, because, as I say, we don't even bother with risk anymore.
And I think risk still continues to motivate us. And there are other models of regional collaboration that I've seen throughout the country. Last year, the Institute of Sustainable Communities hosted a meeting, I think it was here in last fall, and there were these 12 different regions represented. And off the top of my head, I know there were a couple from California, the Bay Area, Boston, the DC area as well, organizations of local governments, and in Jacksonville it was more private sector led. There are examples in different pockets of the country where there are these models of regional collaboration on their risk, if you will. For us, of course, in South Florida, it's really sea level rise. But there are other examples out there, and I can probably talk to you offline and look those up when I get back to my office.
I had a question and a comment. Tony Sochi, again. Debra, it struck me, and I see it from the outside. I don't have your advantage of being right there. But it seems that once these compacts begin to build, there's an energy and a trust that recycles energy within the compact. There's a certain trust that's built over time. And that seems to become the glue that keeps it together and enhances it, basically, sort of gives it the energy to spread out as well. That's a comment that I wanted you to comment on. And secondly, the gentleman here that raised the questions about how do you measure this. One of the things that you've started using is the Carbon Registry, which is in many ways experimental, but I think the starting point of that is that, as I recall, that cities that report would be comparing themselves to themselves. In other words, here's the starting point. Where does that city go time in the registry, rather than a uniform, homogeneous set of measurements?
And I think, Tony, you pick up on an important point. A lot of this is about personal relationships. I mean, if you listen to the stories both Susie and I tell, a lot of that is about people in the right places, building the right links. But the problem is that's not a static system. Those relationships require servicing on an ongoing basis. And particularly in South Africa, the rapid turnover rate of staffing at the local government level is so large that that's something that requires constant fueling. So it's not a case of, I have a compact, I build trust, great, I can walk away and do something else. That's something that requires servicing every day. And that's not a model that local government was set up to do, or to provide that kind of input. And that applies both to our relationships with other local governments, but also in terms of our experimental projects, where we're engaging at the community level of adaptation. That servicing is very resource intensive in terms of, and I mean, Susie very clearly highlighted that. You've got to take staff, you've got to train them, you've got to keep them engaged, you've got to keep opportunities flowing. So, yes, it's a key part, but it's a very resource intensive part from a time and commitment point of view. So, that's my comment to your comment. I think that the challenge around the Carbon Registry is if that's precisely what it is, the cities will report their progress. But the difficulty is, if I go back to my glass ceiling, it's fun being little busy bees at the local government level. But why are we doing this? Not because we're bored, but because we think we need to help try and save the world. Now, if you're going to do that, you've got to be able to draw up some general sense of progress, because what we're saying to international and national parties involved in those discussions is you've got to incorporate us, you've got to structure us in, and you've got to resource us. But you can only maneuver those resources if you can give a demonstration of at least the kind of direction you're heading in. And that's the real challenge. It's fun. You know, Durban did this 4 years ago, we're doing this now. Super. But is that actually changing anything? Is there a momentum that's heading in the right kind of direction? I think that's the piece that's missing, is we must never lose the fact that this is literally a jigsaw puzzle. And at one level, the local is important, but unless we fit into the entire picture in a way that's meaningful. And I think that's the real challenge. We're finding it hard to do that comparative. But as I say, those discussions are happening, and that's the next evolution. And that's the importance of the research partnerships now being aligned with these compacts. It's really to delve into those.
We've got about 10 more minutes.
Rose Schneider, Health Systems Management. There's been a lot of talk about staff and training and built capability and interaction and all of that. I was just wondering, what is the interaction and what is the role of the private sector? Because most of the talk was about the public sector, the staff and all that. But what is the interaction of all of this with businesses in Miami-Dade County? How does that work? Or in Durban?
You're right. Most of the emphasis over the last few years has been on the public sector and getting our staff up to speed and really showing that leadership in the local government. Our plans were developed in conjunction with the private sector. We invited them. A lot of engineering firms obviously are at the table because a lot of engineering solutions are important to the work in South Florida. But more and more, and as this evolves, and like I said earlier, we're kind of making it up as we go along. We're having more conversations with the private sector. We're having more conversations with the development community. And for example, we're saying we're investing in these areas. These are some adaptation measures that we're taking to make this area more resilient. And for example, less prone to flooding. How do we then start asking the development community when they're going to build something? You know, where are you building it and how are you going to build it? And those are the conversations that we're having next. And I know that some cities like Miami Beach, where I'm going next week, they're looking at amending their building codes and their land use regulations to make this more of the conversation and more of the requirement. In Fort Lauderdale, we're just not there yet. And so I think there's little differences and nuances from city to city and county to county.
Certainly in our space, just given our background, we're still involved in a major nation building project. We're 21 years into democracy. And we're really, in many cases, still finding out what the role of each stakeholder in a democratic state is. So, without a doubt, in the South African context, the first port of call for change is the government. It's seen as a major transformative force. So, as in the case in Southeast Florida, it's important that government leads at a variety of levels. But that doesn't move us away from the fact that we have a very fractured society. And as I said in my presentation, climate change is not the only game in town. It's not as if we all go into office and only do Durban Adaptation Charter or climate change. It's a game of chess. We've got many other chess pieces on the board. So there are other processes in the city that we're using to slowly draw in a variety of different stakeholder groups into a broader discussion, which then allows us to set up the kind of set pieces that will allow a climate conversation to enter into the debate. So that's part of a broader restructure. And so again, it's part of that bigger jigsaw puzzle, is what are the right pieces and when do you bring them into that? So it's only now that we're beginning to bring the private enterprise into the city's strategic planning in a significant way. And it's a cautious relationship. You know, both parties are eyeing each other out around the table. And so it's building that trust, building the kind of connections that we need. So that's a work in progress still.
Okay, we go to Mark and then take and then we'll take answers.
Hi, I'm Mark Goldberg with the Urban Institute. Thanks to both of you for terrific presentations and important work. I have two questions about something that you referred to earlier in the session, and that's scalability or scale. First question is, how important are economies of scale or potential economies of scale in building support for and momentum for regional collaboration? And the second question has to do with the sort of vertical dimension of this work. As you think about the next 3 to 5 years, how much priority do you think ought to be given to building linkages to national adaptation planning, national adaptation implementation? What are the strategies and mechanisms that you think have the most leverage for doing that?
This is eThekwini from Start. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have just one quick question, but adaptation is very large and broad area, but how do you decide the program or project to select from the broad area, such as, for example, coastal products, coastal protection, agriculture, or something?
Let me start with the last question first. That prioritization is a very difficult process, particularly in a resource scarce environment. And after we went through our municipal adaptation planning, we ended up with a vast shopping list. Even just looking at 3 sectors, we had something like 47 different activities. And we looked at ways of trying to determine which of those we tackle first. And in fact, we could find no tools that were useful to us, because many of them were linked to impacts on GDP and so on. We've got vast sectors of our city areas that are informal. They don't fall into the normal kind of categorization that one would regard in those tools. So we had to invent new tools. We invented a new cost-benefit tool focused on human benefit. So we've chosen the interventions that give us maximum bang for our buck in terms of human benefit. And so that's really how we've got to deciding whether we tackle coastal infrastructure or stormwater or biodiversity, is we put through that particular filter. In terms of the economy of scale, that's a big driver, and it's particularly a big driver for those of us who sit at the end of a pipe. If you're in a water resource scarce environment like Durban, the ability to manage the full water cycle, so to use spatial planning as a tool to effectively increase the security of our water supply, which is one of the huge impacts that Durban is looking at, is one of the big draw cards for the regional level of operation. And before we even brought the compact model home, we were working on a catchment-based approach well outside of our municipal boundaries, simply because those economies of scale around the limiting natural resources that feed our cities have become important determinants of our long-term sustainability. We feel very strongly about the need that national adaptation plans have to be built on the back of local adaptation plans. And that's the reason for going to the scalability, is we want to create leverage with national government to effectively, dare I use the word demand, or forcibly persuade them of that need, because we see so many of those sorts of plans that are produced without reference to the local, that in the best case scenario become dysfunctional, and the worst case scenario actually subverts local government agendas in a way that is damaging to us. So we're working quite aggressively through our local work and indeed through our interaction through processes that are being run now by the USA to try and influence that national adaptation planning debate at the international level.
For the sake of time, let me just mention one concrete example of what we've done in Fort Lauderdale in terms of prioritizing, because we too have a 5-year strategic plan with a variety of projects. We also have a 5-year capital plan that outlines our needs over the next 5 years and how we're going to invest. One of the first projects I worked on in the city was developing a matrix, if you will, to score the project. So as departments put in their suggestions and their wants, it's not just pure infrastructure need, but whatever they want to rebuild or build now is judged against a criteria. And if your project promotes sustainability principles, if it reduces risk, so that's tied to public safety, if it conserves energy or water, it gets more points and it goes to the top of the list of the capital projects being funded. And again, that's just another way of local government not doing things the same old, same old. Local government for a long time was just being reactive instead of proactive, and the squeaky wheel gets the grease. What we've been doing is actually looking at our work and trying to actually judge and really informing the decision-making process. So the few dollars that we have, what's the most bang for our buck?
Thanks to both of you. That's great. Thanks to you for coming. Next time we'll make sure the lights are on. Really, the only questions from this side of the room. And under the lights. I'm on the edge of the lights. Thanks everyone. Please fill out the form, the registration thing. Thanks very much to Kamana from the Atlas Project for hosting us. Thanks to Jessica and ICMA and the City Links program for bringing Jessica to us. Thank you, Susie. And thanks to ACCO and eThekwini for promoting this through their network as well. Tony, thank you. And see you in October. And I think we are agreeing that in October it's going to be the actually the fourth Thursday.
Oh, sorry, October 22nd.
So it's gonna be October 22nd because the first Thursday of October, the first of October is Thursday. And so it was gonna be early, and our speaker
Fourth Thursday,
is only available on the fourth Thursday, which kind of feels like the third.
22nd.
Now that you're all thoroughly confused, I can't tell you that. Thank you very much for that time.